Welcome back to Golden Rule Radio. This is Rob with Miles and Tori. We're glad you're listening in. On a very sad note, we just had the entire world change over this weekend, and our prayers go out to the people in Israel and for the horrific tragedy that has just occurred, and pray for a speedy and successful outcome.
Yeah, turned on a dime is probably, I think, the term that you used earlier too. I mean, it's incredible how quickly things can turn, and we're so focused on the markets, and we have this constant tug of war going on between bulls and bears in terms of fundamentals, that push and pull on our market, the precious metals market. And a lot of times we can get predictive in the charts, right? And Miles has said over the years, the charts are going to do what the charts are going to do. Ultimately, you'll see it play out. But what is unpredictable is the impetus for that change.
These black swan events.
Yeah.
It's definitely a black swan event.
So last week, Miles, you and I were talking just about the fact that gold and silver looked oversold. They had separated from the moving average, that they were on a key support. So all of those were reasons for a reversal, but not knowing that it was going to be to this extent. Gold's up 3.5%. Part of the tug of war is obviously geopolitics, and we've had some geopolitical strain, to understate it.
Yeah, it's definitely somber when you think about going back to COVID and then going back to Russia, Ukraine, and now Israel, Hamas. And how do we sit and have a show where we talk about being as blunt as possible here, capitalizing on tragedy? Like, how do you have that kind of market discussion? And maybe we just accept that's part of life, and we just trudge forward into it. So, yeah, something I've been saying for many, many years. I'm always incredibly fascinated how somehow magically events and natural market moves just happen to coincide right next to each other. I mean, like you were saying, we were talking last week, we knew a bounce in gold was coming. Now, is it a reversal to where we start looking at putting in those higher prices that everybody's waiting for? Or is it just a bounce off of the decline that we had? We had a 6 or 7% decline. We've had, 3.5% reversal back up. Is this a bounce or is this a reversal? Obviously, we don't know. COVID, it was a bounce that turned into a reversal, and we ended up putting in significantly higher prices.
Because so many other fundamentals were naturally changing in response to COVID. You start to see a ripple effect through monetary policy.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point.
Economics.
It's fascinating to me how those things tend to coincide. We knew gold was going to bounce. Gold would have bounced whether Israel happened this weekend or not. So on one hand, you can argue that they're not correlated at all. But on the other side, you start looking at this weird butterfly effect with the market, where somehow when you know something's probably going to happen in the market, and then all of a sudden something happens that has nothing to do with the market at the exact same time, I'm always fascinated by that. I don't know what that thread is that weaves itself through our species, but there's something out there, some spiritual component out there that ends up tying all this stuff together. So I don't know. I'm feeling pretty somber today. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I don't really have a lot to share on the charts. Gold is probably going to keep climbing. It's got some real levels it's got to get above. One we're hitting today, which is that old floor. So we're bumping up against that old floor today, which is sitting right about, 1880. That lower trend line, we've got to get above this upper level compression. There's a couple things that gold has to do to reestablish that next leg up. But then you bring something like this weekend in, you bring something like Russia in, you bring something like COVID in, and that's the type of thing that gives it legs.
Yeah, I mean, the second time we hit 2080 was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? That was an overshoot. So oftentimes you'll see an overshoot. I was telling a client today, look, the prices had started to go up before the weekend, and that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have reversed again on Monday, right, Rob?
But they did. Friday, we saw a strong move on Friday, indicating a reversal, and then, of course, Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. And so I would say we're up from the low. The low that I saw put in was 1,809 on gold. I saw 1,878 this morning, so that's almost a $70 reversal. And I would say $50 of that is probably the geopolitical tensions. And is it going to reverse, Miles? I don't know. I mean, now you have to get into the predicting, normally we're in the predicting of monetary policy or dollar strength or something else that's going to push gold. Now we hear news of Hezbollah firing shots across the border. This can go much deeper, right? This can go as deeply as Iran. This can go involving other countries in crossover with these two primary sides having allies jump into the fray in just a little bit here and a little bit there, and suddenly there's just not any settling. So who knows where this ends up going, but technical analysis is kind of out the window.
Sure. So from a technical standpoint, because we broke out of that previous trading range, so we had that compression zone that we'd been talking about for weeks, because we broke below it, gold now has to do a handful of things. First, it's got to stay above the previous low. So this would be the previous low and what we bounced, and we did bounce above it, but that'd be the previous low back in, what was that, February or March, which was down around 1,800. Next, we have to get above the new ceiling, which was the old floor. Support and resistance kind of change roles when you break out of trading ranges. Then we have to get out of that trading range, back above that, and then we got to start stair-stepping up. So gold actually has a couple things it needs to do here. Let's say we did have a reversal off of this news. It ain't going to be a clean run. There's going to be some fist fighting here in the markets, getting through some of these levels where there's a lot of positions that have been taken in that $100 trading range. There's a lot of people who bought and sold there. There's going to be standing orders there, and you got to fist fight your way through that stuff.
But the commitment of traders was heavily short going into this week.
The managed money position.
Managed money position.
Which is rare.
Which
Right.
it also tells you this wasn't predicted in any fashion.
Right. So you're looking at a certain level of short covering that could turn the fist fight into a one-sided event.
Really good point. Yeah, they have to run out of those positions and not lose even more.
Yep.
Well, and there are a lot more fundamentals again than just the geopolitics. I mean, economically speaking, the fact that we added $270 billion in one day to our debt, we're on track in October to add $1 trillion. Those are the things that bode well in the long term, and we can't lose sight of the forest for the trees, meaning these short little moves. If, God willing, there's a calming of tensions and a ceasefire of sorts, then gold naturally should give up some of this gain and settle back into where the rest of the markets are saying where it really should be. And we'll just see how that ends up playing out. But the news isn't getting better out of China. They're mulling new stimulus. They've got a potential of 1 trillion yuan of additional sovereign debt for spending on infrastructure, just trying to spend their way out of it. And meanwhile, Country Garden is a huge commercial developer, and they're warning of default again. And yet somehow European stocks rebound just because China is stimulating. Well, their stimulus of $137 billion is nothing compared to our addition to our national debt on a weekly basis. But I don't think that goes far. And the picture just gets more and more grim.
So moving over to silver, it's going to be a pretty similar story. Stay above the previous low, which we're well above, going back to the March low of around, sub 20, 1995, 1990, somewhere in there. So we're well above that. We need to get above the previous floor, which is also right at the 50% retracement that you can see on the chart here. So, and then start to establish some growth on the way up. So silver, we're talking a couple bucks from now before you can really start saying bull market. Or at least resumption of the longer-term bull market trend. So I think this is where I'll just keep screaming the benefit of dollar cost averaging, especially in a declining market. Adding additional political international pressures. When we look at the dollar here, I'm also kind of interested to see how it reacted to this weekend, which is probably not what you would have expected it to do. So looking at where we're going forward, I still think dollar cost averaging into the silver position with, where's the ratio at now, Tori? Do you know?
85. Yeah.
So with that ratio still just mulling about in the 80s, 2010,
silver. Yeah.
2011, I mean, silver goes 15 to 49 in 9 months, maybe less, 8 months.
Ratio goes 80 to basically 31 in that period of time. So
silver is a patient man's game. It just is. And I think for anybody who's dollar costing in, adding it as a adjacent position to your gold and just being patient with it, yeah, I'm still a silver buyer down here. So I like buying on the way down a little bit, and I like buying on the way up a lot. But I think this is the time to be just chipping away at your silver position. Tiny plug, do we have a program at McIlvaney Precious Metals that allows you to, say, every 2 weeks chip into your silver position that anybody knows about?
Why, yes, we do.
Tell me about that, Rob.
That would be our vaulted platform.
There you go.
And it's just getting set up to where people can do a bi-monthly or monthly withdrawal into their silver and gold accounts just a little bit at a time.
Yeah, a lot of our listeners have been doing it in their gold position, and I believe silver's finally just rolling out too to be able to do that regularly. So if you haven't checked your vaulted, if you've had your vaulted account just kind of on autopilot for the last 2 years like I have, maybe log in and move some stuff around, because you can be adding silver on a bi-monthly basis now as well. So before we move on to a couple news pieces, if you don't mind, let me finish out the charts real quick, because I made a comment about the dollar. World reserve currency. We've got one war taking place in Eastern Europe, a second one probably kicking off this weekend. World reserve currency probably had a pretty strong week. U.S. dollar index definitely went up this week.
No,
Rob's
it did
shaking his
not.
head no, because it sure didn't.
It didn't. It went from 107 back down to 105.
So natural market movements are still in control. And that's the part I said I'm kind of surprised by this, because Middle Eastern implications, as you guys were saying a second ago, you start bringing in additional Middle Eastern players, it can spiral out of control relatively quickly. And seeing how that ends up affecting the European markets or the U.S. dollar or U.S. Treasury markets with international money coming in, and the price of gold, it could be a busy winter, I think is what I'm getting at.
Well, I mean, Finland just had a gas pipe leak, and the probe now is on the Russians. If that plays out to be true and the Russians sabotage this Finnish underwater pipeline, I mean, that's a NATO member state, and there's another domino. So it doesn't just have to be the Middle East. It can start to build and have ripple effects outward that way. So especially when you see these nations get desperate, when China's economy is like this, Russia's economy, we've said it on this show for over a year. War often results, right, Rob? I mean, when countries get desperate to revive their economy and it's broken and nothing's working, it's what they do. It pulls them out of the dregs at the cost of human lives.
That's going to do it for this week's Golden Rule Radio. Truly a very serious time. Pray your family is safe.
Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking with you next week.